In this video, we're going to start working on wrapping up our series by introducing you to the UMG, or User Interface Components, and creating an endgame menu. Let's get started. UMG, or Unreal Motion Graphics, is the built-in system to design your user interfaces. It's pretty simple to use, and I actually like using it a lot. Let's go ahead and create one. Like everything else, we're going to create a folder to hold our stuff. So we'll create a new folder called UI, and then we're going to create a new widget inside of there. Now there's a few different ways it's going to be referred to. You have a user interface, you have a UMG, you have a widget. They're all basically the same thing. They're called user widgets, and UMG is the overarching system that you use to create user widgets. We're going to go ahead and right click, scroll down to user interface. This is one big issue a lot of people run into. Depending on the size, you may not even notice it. There is a scroll bar. You may have to scroll down. We're going to go to user interface, widget blueprint. We're going to name this one UMG, and then we'll do game over screen because I want to name it that. Let me open it up, and we now have our user interface UMG interface widget designer. Quick overview of the designer. We have our palette. This is basically our widgets. Like I said, it's going to be confusing slightly and interchangeable. Widgets are all of our things like our images, borders, buttons, and things like that. And you use widgets inside of another widget to create your user interface, and you could even have more by like creating your own custom widget, which you put in your user interface widget, maybe for your map. So it's kind of widgetception. We have our hierarchy. This is basically our layout. We have a really cool little animation section at the bottom, which we will not be covering, but allows you to create really simple animations using keyframes. And we have our details panel. The primary section of our designer is going to be our interface here, which is a mock-up and representation of our user interface. Now the system is designed to accommodate different screen sizes, different ratios, different DPIs, and things like that. Out of the box, it works fairly well. You're going to have some small issues with edge cases, and that is covered separately, and it's more detail. For the most part though, you can leave your settings at default. And what we're going to care about is this button right here, which is zoom to fit, so when you accidentally go somewhere, you can hit zoom and put it back on the screen. By default, as you can see here, it's going to result in a 720p resolution, and it's going to set to fill screen so you can actually see how it looks. Just because this is a 720p screen resolution doesn't mean it's not going to scale properly to something like 1080 and things like that. And I just click this button, if I close this, which takes me over to my settings screen, and this is a curve that basically says, hey, as my screen gets bigger and my DPIs change, we're going to go ahead and scale things appropriately. All you really have to worry about is out of the box, it works pretty good. Let's set up our screen. So laying out our widget. We're going to make this super simple. Under common, we have a few things. We're going to do buttons. We're going to slap 2 buttons into our screen because we're going to have a quit, restart, and a quit. Now buttons are just buttons. They don't have any text on them. They are meant to be a button that you click on and stuff happens. They can hold one child. If you move your mouse over these, you'll see descriptions, and the most important ones are the ones at the bottom. This can hold a child. You can have one thing underneath it, an image or text, for example. But you have something like an image where it has no children. So an image is basically the end of the line and nothing else can be attached to it. We're going to do text. So if we go down here to text and we drop it in, you can just literally drop it in and it works. If I delete this and we look down here in our hierarchy, we'll see our canvas panel is our outline. That's our screen basically. Here's our button right here, and then underneath our button is our text. If we drag text onto our button down here, it'll be the same thing. So you can drag into our screen like here, or you can drag into your hierarchy under anything you want. Let me get rid of that text block, and that's one of those bugs that will come up from time to time if you drag it out of the screen. These are really simple to set up. There are tons of options. All of these things are covered in individual videos. We're just going to change the text on them. We're going to change this one to restart game. And then the bottom one, we're going to change the text to quit game. Now, let's change our size up to something bigger like, let's just drag and make it really big. That was kind of silly. Let's make it something like 62. And you'll notice the words no longer fit. Everything's in kind of like a fitting and aligning and flow type system. Our button belongs to the canvas panel. Because it belongs to the canvas panel, our button is allowed to set its size exactly. Because it's set to a certain size, the text does not fit. An easy solution to this is we can go to our button and tell it to size to content, and boom, it'll change to the size of our content. Go to the other button, boom. Now it's smaller because of our text is smaller. And if we go down here to our text and change it, it'll change automatically. So it's really handy. Let's change this one to 48. No, let's go with 58. Make it a little smaller. There we go. We have restart and quit. Kind of looks like crap and things aren't organized and centered very well. There's a few ways we can take care of that, but we'll make it really simple. The outside border here, my canvas panel, it's a container. It holds things. The canvas panel allows its children to be exactly where they want to be. 100 pixels from the left, top right corner, 80 pixels outside of the bottom, wherever they want. It's exact. Other panels under the panel section are more for layout purposes. And we're going to use the vertical box. The vertical box, basically, all of its children are stacked up vertically, one on top of the other. So, like a really nice layout. We can drag in a vertical box, and then we could drag our stuff in. Or, the super simple way, let's take our first button, right-click, wrap with vertical box. And it's going to put a vertical box around our button. Let's take this other button, drop it on the vertical box, and now we have two buttons inside of our vertical box. And if you notice, they're now the same width, and things are looking much better. Our vertical box is set up, again, size to content, and it's set up where its children inside of it are going to fill themselves out automatically. Now, our vertical box isn't centered, and we can fix that simply. Remember the canvas panel? It lets us do whatever we want with its content. Well, that's all of these settings up here. So what we're going to do is anchor to the center, and that's going to anchor our vertical box to the center. Now you notice nothing changed. Well, that's because we still have some offsets. Let's go ahead and reset everything to 0. And we now have no position offsets, and we have no sizes. Now keep in mind, the sizes won't matter because we have size to content turned on. So these are ignored. We have alignment as our last section. Alignment is basically 0 to 1, top left, bottom right, 1, 1. So if we want to align this dead center, we would change this to 0.5, 0.5. And now our vertical box is dead center in our screen, no matter what size our screen is. And then our items will fill themselves in appropriately based on size. Now I want a little bit of space, so let's go ahead and adjust the padding. Here's our top button. I want it to pad on the bottom by 25. And now we have a space. This entire thing is still centered properly. We just now have 25 pixels between the two. I want a little bit of space on the outside too. Should our buttons have outer padding? Or inner padding? Nah, well, actually that would be on our text. So our text would have to have padding. Let's go with 10 padding. Let's see, erase this. Let's go with 10 all the way around. There we go. Now we have 10 pixels around our text before the button hits. Okay, enough fine tuning. It's good enough. Let's actually set this up and make it work. Let's code our buttons. Hopefully you figured out at this point in time, when you want stuff to do stuff in Blueprints, for the most part, it's going to have an event where it handles it. So if we go to our button and we scroll down, we can find events. On clicked, pressed, released, hovered, and unhovered. On click, that's the one we want. So when we click the restart game button, it's going to fire this event. Let's go ahead and clean up extra junk. And we're going to call onClicked button 85. Well, organization. Organization's good. We'll go back to our designer. We're going to go to our button here, and we're going to look up here in our details panel. And here's our name, button 85. Let's change that to restart game button. You'll notice it changes over here. We'll go over here, and we'll go with the quit game button. And we'll go ahead and compile, and we'll go back. And now you notice we have onClicked restart game button. Now we know exactly what this does. What do we want to do when we restart? All restarting, for the most part, does is opens up a level. When we are to go into, let's save everything, and go into our maps. And here's our map that came with our third-party example. When we double-click on this, it's going to open this third-party map. When we go into our map that we created, it's going to open our My Map. So all we want to do is open up the My Map. Now in order to do that, let's type in level, and let's see what we have. And you notice the first thing that happened when we type level is open level, and it says travel to another level. We'll click on that, and we type in the name of what we want to load up, My Map. And that's honestly all we're going to have to do for now for the onClicked restart game. When we click the button, it opens up My Map. That's it. It's just simply going to open the level up, and it's going to replace what we currently have. Since it's the same one, it's basically restarting the game. Let's hook up our quit button. We can go over to here, and we'll have access to our events. onClick. And I hope you can figure this one out. Let's see what the search says. Type in quit, and we have quit game. And that's it. That's all you need to do for quitting. Now when we hit the quit button, the game quits. Now since we are using a sequence to open up our level, our end game, we're going to have to hook it up in a special way. And this is one of those, I don't quite like too much things, but it's just the way Sequencer works. When you're using Sequencer and an event fires off, in our case we have our event show game over screen. I'm going to copy this. It's going to basically talk to the level blueprint and run that event. So what we need to do is go into blueprints, open level blueprint, delete the CRUD that's already in here, and create a new custom event. And the nice thing is I copied, so I paste, and we have show game over screen. What's going to happen when that sequencer fires is it's going to go into our level blueprint and run this. Just like any other blueprint, we're going to run from left to right, and we're going to make stuff happen. Widgets work by creating them that will physically manifest them and create an instance of them, and then you choose what you want to do with them. Just because you create them doesn't mean you can see them. You need to add them to your screen after you create them. And there's a reason for that, because you may have multiplayer and only want to add something to a individual screen. So what we're going to do is create again, and hopefully you can look through here and guess what you might want to create. Things are organized, so we have user interface and we have create widget. Remember, these are called user interface widgets, so we're going to create a widget. We go through our list and you're going to find a ton of options. Unfortunately, with the VR editor, it adds a ton of options. And we're going to need to find our screen. And ours is UMG game over screen. And we're going to go ahead and save that out. Now, when the game over screen starts, it's going to create the widget. Are we going to do anything else with this later? No, I'm just going to create it on the screen. I'm not going to hide it later. I'm just going to create it. So we need to figure out what we want to do with it after we've created it. Let's do show. No, show doesn't work. Display. No, display doesn't work. Add. Add's going to work under user interface. Now, if you want, we could just do this the guessing way, and that's a great way to learn, in my opinion. We have the user interface. This is part of the user interface. When we went to create, it was in the user interface section. So from here, let's go back to user interface and let's look and see what we have. Animation and viewport. Well, we have viewport and we have add to player screen, add to viewport, setting alignments and positions. One of these two might work. Let's see. add it to the game viewport and fills the entire screen, or adds to the game's viewport in a section dedicated to the player. This is valuable in split screen. So remember how I mentioned you don't add it automatically? It's because we choose. Let's add it to the viewport. The viewport is this, basically this screen that the player sees through their camera when they're playing. So at this point in time, if we hooked everything up right, let's see what happens. We should be able to click on the button and it should open, it should trigger. And once we're done with our scene and it fades out, it should trigger our menu. Now, moving the mouse, I kind of can't do anything. And that's something we need to work on in a second. You might find an issue here. If you hit escape, whoops, wrong button, it should quit out if you're lucky. If it doesn't, if you're playing inside of here and you need to get out of here and escape doesn't work, when you first start playing, if you look in the top left corner, it'll tell you Shift F1 for mouse cursor. You can hit Shift F1, you'll get your cursor back and you can hit stop. So, now that we have our thing on our screen, we need to be able to interact with it, and, well, we need to be able to interact with it. This is pretty simple. The player controller, which I've mentioned before, controls how you interact and your input works, and that includes your mouse. When we run our game, the default input is game only. That means the game takes all the input, and that's why when we move the mouse, we can move the mouse, and when we move the keyboard, we can move our character. So if we get our player controller, we should be able to do something with our input. We're going to want to worry about our input to the user interface, and we're going to want to worry about our mouse. So the cool part is, let's just type in input and see what we have. We have touch input, and we have mouse input for events, get input events, touch input, player controller. We have a bunch of things. But down here under, once I collapse all these, straight input, we have set input mode. And we have game and UI, game only, and UI only. We don't want our player to control the game anymore. We just want them to click on the user interface. So we'll do set input mode UI only. And actually, if you looked at that, and let's do set input, and we looked at the description, you'll see it says, set up an input mode that allows only the UI to respond. This event is only for cosmetic, non-gameplay actions. And there we go. We can go ahead and hook this up. And we're going to go ahead and set our input to UI only. So now any input is going to go to the player controller. And it's not going to go into the character itself. It's only going to go to our user interface. We have told it to only go to user interface. You have a few other options here. We don't care about them. Our next one is mouse. So let's look for mouse. And let's look through, if we were to look through all of our options, we actually don't care about the mouse. We care about the mouse cursor. So let's look for mouse cursor spelled properly. And you actually don't find anything. Now remember I mentioned we have context sensitivity. If we uncheck this, we'll actually find a few other options. Or, let's go to our palette, which apparently I have closed. And let's look for a mouse cursor. And you'll notice on here, everything, of course, it's context sensitive, so we can't see anything in here either. So it's half pointless. This is why I don't use the palette. Let's go back to mouse cursor. Undo context sensitive. And we're going to find under the player controller, set show mouse cursor. Sets the variable of show mouse cursor, whether the mouse cursor should be displayed. We'll click on it, and we will hook it up. And then show mouse cursor is just a little checkbox. And that should show the cursor. If we compile it, you're going to get our error. Hopefully you know at this point what we should do. The target, it tells us, it's a reference to our player controller. It is expecting to be able to use the mouse cursor, this node, by talking to our player controller. So we need to tell it which player controller are we using and which one are we adjusting. Single player game, not much of an issue. Multiplayer, this is where our different indexes come in. I'm going to go ahead and just drag off our existing controller and drop it in, and then add a reroute node to clean things up. Now if we compile, and read, when we show the game over screen, we create our game over widget, we add it to our viewport, we set our input mode to UI only, and we show our mouse cursor. Let's see how much we broke. We'll go ahead and run this. Walk outside. Watch our super awesome cinematic. Now, in case you're wondering why it's jerky, the video is running at 60, but our cinematic's only running at 30, so we're going to have that little bit of jerkiness. You can obviously adjust it as needed for your game. But now that we're done, I have my mouse cursor. My buttons interact when I move over them. And if I use my WASD keys, nothing's happening. We're going to go ahead and hit quit. And our game quits out. That's half of our stuff done. Let's check out restarting. And I'm already telling you right now, restarting is broke. We've got two issues with restarting. One is really annoying, and the other one is simply learning more stuff. So when we hit restart, we're going to find ourselves back in the game here. And we're going to find that we can't do anything. Why can't we do anything? Well, I have my mouse cursor, and I have my keys, and nothing's happening. And actually, when I hit escape, this is one of the reasons why I told you Shift F1, I can't do anything. So Shift F1, and that's not going to let you out either. So you can Alt Tab to get out, back into here and stop it, or you can hit Alt F4, will close down your current window. What is our problem? Well, our problem is we took control away from the game right here. We need to give the game control back. We may be asking, well, why? It worked fine when we ran it. Why didn't it work fine when we restarted it? Well, things like your player controller here, your input modes, those are going to be persistent. They're going to persist among level restarts and things like that. So when you start working with the user interface and controlling input modes, you're going to have to make sure you keep track of the state at all times. We're only going to have two times we're going to care about: when the game starts and when the game ends. The nice thing is it's really simple to fix it when the game starts. We have our level blueprint here, right? And this level blueprint fires whenever the level's loaded. Well, this level blueprint's here. This, if we do begin play, fires whenever the level is loaded. And hopefully you can figure out exactly what we're going to do. We're just going to copy our controller, set our input to the game mode, and then set mouse cursor to disabled. Hook these things up properly. Give them a little bit of good looks, like that. Yeah, that should work. And go ahead and hit play. Now when this level loads, it's going to set the input mode for the first player to nothing, to game only, and then hide the mouse cursor. There we go. We can move. We can land. We can run out. We can watch our fantastically awesome cinematic. Watch it go back in. We can restart. And then we're back just like we were before. We can move our character. The mouse no longer has control of our interface. Everything's back to like we were before. And you could completely annoy someone by removing the quit game and only letting them play over and over our fantastic little demo here. Let's quit out, and we are done with that. So that is going to basically wrap up our introduction to UMG. UMG is a great little thing for interfaces. It does not... It's used for user interfaces. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to wrap this up. I'm going to make a new one. I'm going to do a user interface. I'm going to do widget blueprint. I'm going to do UMG player HUD. We're going to call this one the player HUD. We're going to open this up. And we're going to take a text box and we're going to anchor it to the bottom of the screen. We're going to reset everything like I enjoy doing. And we'll do size 0 and size 0 and size to content, because I like making things fit. Or our alignment is going to be over half of it and all the way at the bottom, so that way it's up. Now we need to go up on our y-axis. So let's see, we're going to want to go like that. So let's go -50. Let's make this something like that, a health display. Throw some text in here. Whew, that's big. Let's go 48. There we go. And we have some health. And this is just simply going to show our player's health. Now, we could hook it up to the HUD, which is something that comes for free. We could have our player do it. You want to put it somewhere where it's proper. Yep. I'm going to show you the game mode and the HUD while we're here in UMG. In our project settings, which we're actually going to go into for our next video, we have our maps and modes. Game modes control things such as the pawn you're using by default, which is our third-person character, the HUD, player controllers, game states, player states, spectator pawns, a whole bunch of stuff. So this is where our controller is, and this is where our character is, and this is our class that controls the heads-up display. So like, for example, a first-person shooter might show the crosshairs and things like that. This is an older relic. You don't have to use the HUD. It's simply there because it used to exist and it will probably always exist. However, the nice thing about the HUD, if you're in Blueprints and you do game HUD, whoops, which of course I can't do inside of a blueprint. Let me go to my player. There we go. And we'll go into my player and we'll do get HUD. Oh, seriously? Oh, I think the HUD's part of the controller. Let's hold on. Let's undo context sensitivity. Here we go. Get HUD class. Okay, it's part of the game mode. Like I said, I knew it was somewhere. You could do something like get game mode, and then you could do get HUD like this. Oh, it's part of the friggin' player controller too. Seriously. Get HUD. There we go. There. Oh, okay. Seriously. Oh, I'm in the player. Yeah, okay, that would be why. So anyways, this would return the HUD that we've created. If we've created a HUD class, for example, and set it up. And rather than having to have a specific reference, like I start my player creates the HUD widget, it saves a reference to the HUD widget, and now only my player knows about the HUD widget. If you use the built-in game mode HUD, anything, the player can access the HUD, the enemies when they die can access the HUD, your spawning thing that controls how many enemies are spawned and can update the HUD with how many enemies are left. So it's pretty cool. So let's do that. We're going to do the game mode, and we're going to do the HUD, and we're going to slap a little interface so I can show you UMG working just generically. Everything goes in my content because that's where we want to put it, and we're going to make a new one I call framework. And these are the things that are part of your game's framework. Go back to our settings, things like your pawns, your controllers, your characters, your game states, player states, things like that. HUD is what we care about. But we're going to need to set up our own game mode first. Let's go Blueprint, and what do you know? Game mode. Game mode, and we're going to call this one my game mode because it's better than your game mode. My game mode is a data only blueprint to start with. If we were to open it, close it, and then open it again, it's going to show this, and it's going to say it's a data only blueprint. Your game mode basically is a reference to other important things. Default pawn class, we need to change this to third person character. HUD class, we're actually going to work on that in a second. Player controller class is our player controller, and then all these other ones. None of these changed except our third person character. This is where if you made your own character, like my awesome character, this is where you would set it up so it used my awesome character. Let's go with the HUD now. Let's go back to our project, and we're going to create a new HUD. Blueprint class, and then we need to look for HUD. And you'll find HUD down here under all classes. If you don't see that, just click the little arrow, type in HUD. We're going to create a new HUD, and we'll call this my HUD. And we'll go ahead and save. We'll go back to our game mode, and we'll set up our HUD as my HUD. There we go. So now, if I was using my game mode, I would use the third person character as my default pawn. I'd use my HUD as the HUD class, and I'd use player controller as a player controller, and then various other things. Now, how do we actually use my game mode? Well, it's under the project settings where we were before. Default game mode, my game mode, and there we go. Now we have, by default, whenever we do anything in this game, we have my game mode set to be the default game mode. If we were to run this and we were to look over here, I use Shift F1 to get out. We can now see my game mode is running and my HUD is running. So now we have my HUD and my game mode running. So this is using my settings now. Awesome. Let's go into the game mode. We're going to use this just to simply add our HUD to the screen. And this is really simple. We're going to create a widget. Hopefully you saw that one coming. And we're going to create, what did we call it? We called it the UMG player HUD. And we're going to add to the viewport. And honestly, that's it. That's all we need to do. We hit play. We now see health at 100 at the bottom. That's it. That's all we needed to do. We've just simply created a HUD, a generic HUD, that anyone's going to be able to access on our screen. Now, technically, they're not going to be able to access it if we don't save a reference to it. Hopefully you figured that one out. But if you wanted to do this the right way, you would do something like this. Boop, boop, like that. And we have a nice little train going here. And basically, we name this, of course, and we'll call this player HUD. And I'm going to go ref. So I called it player. Ooh, look at all those extra blue lines. Let's unconnect these things. There we go. I call this player HUD ref, so I know offhand it is the player HUD reference. Now we'll run this. Nothing changes. But the cool part is I could do something like, let's say when, actually, hey, let's just hook it up. You know what? Let's hook it up. This would be smart. So here's an issue you're going to run into. Goes down. I go out here. Our cinematic runs. Oh, look, it says health 100 at the bottom. That's awesome. That's a great cinematic. We can fix that. Where would we fix that? Well, let's zoom back to our level. How does that work? Our trigger right here triggers our cinematic. So we want to edit our trigger. Go into our game over trigger. How does this work? Let's see. We're overlapping with the character. And by the way, this is something that I should have showed you before. Comment everything. If you're reading this and you have to look over everything, you could always cheat and do it an easier way. We're going to go ahead and right click on any node and type in a comment. And right here is this the character? And then right here we would do create our sequence. And then right here we could do play our sequence. And of course my P didn't work, so we'll type this again, play our sequence. And now if someone was to come in here, we could do something like, did something leave our trigger? We could go, okay, did something leave our trigger? Is it the character? If true, create our sequence, play our sequence, and then right here, our next thing, disable input. So let's go ahead and before we play our sequence, actually right here, so if it's the player, let's disable the UI. We'll move everything out of the way. Now, before we saw we could get the controller. Get controller. And then we saw we could get the HUD. And now we can, what? Our HUD has a reference to the player that we need to hide. So we do player HUD and we have an issue. The issue is we are trying to get the player HUD reference from my HUD by talking to the HUD. The issue here is, let's look at our values. When we talk to our player controller, it is returning a player controller reference. From the player controller reference, we are getting our HUD. It's returning a HUD reference. Now the problem is the parent class of this is a HUD. But the only place that knows about my player HUD reference, this variable here, is my HUD version. Not the HUD version, but the my HUD, my specific version. And this is where what's known as casting comes into play. This is where my reference to Hugh Jackman and Wolverine came into play. Right here I'm saying, hello, Mr. director, can you get me your actor? And it's saying, yeah, here's Hugh Jackman. And you're like, no, I need the Hugh Jackman with the claws. So we go, okay, well, let's go ahead and cast to my HUD. This is our Hugh Jackman with claws. Hook this up. Because it's an execute node, it has to be hooked up. And we're going to go ahead and do something from here. Now as my HUD, if we type in player, we get the player HUD reference. Because Hugh Jackman, as Wolverine, has access to his claws, which is our HUD reference right here. Now that we have our player HUD reference, we can do something like set visibility on the widget. And we'll set it to hidden. We'll go ahead and continually move widgets over. Oops, undo, move, hook up. There we go, like that. And we'll run this and see if it works. And if it works, then that's fantastic. If it doesn't work, then that's not fantastic. There we go. Our HUD now disappears. And we'll go ahead and end. We'll hit restart. Our HUD comes back. Now, how did that work? Well, like I said, we talked to the player controller and we said, hey, where's your HUD? It returned the HUD. And we said, hey, HUD, I don't want the generic version. I want the specific version. I want the version of the HUD that has my references. So I told it to give me the my HUD version of the HUD, which is this one right here with this code and all this stuff in it. It said, okay, here you go. Now, once I got that, I said, okay, now let me have the reference to my player's widget, the player HUD. And it said, okay, well, I've got that right here. Here you go. I said, okay, player HUD, let's go ahead and set your visibility to hidden. And it's like, okay, sure. And it hid it, and then we went ahead and played. So hopefully you can see here what the casting intended. You always need to make sure you're talking to the specific thing when you are doing stuff. You cannot just say, it's my HUD, therefore it's the only one that ever exists, therefore it's got to be the right one. No. You want the specific HUD that is in our scene, that is controlled and referenced right here. You want the specific player HUD reference, which is inside this HUD, which we've created earlier. So that's something to keep in mind. With that, we are going to go ahead and wrap up the UMG video. Hopefully you've learned how to create some basic user interface. We went ahead and hooked it up. We played with our player input a little bit. We worked with the end game sequencer level end event. We fixed some errors regarding mouse input. I went ahead and tossed in using a generic player HUD just to show you your user interface is really easy. And I tossed in some casting stuff because apparently that's needed. The next video is basically going to work on wrapping everything up. I know I've said that over the last couple videos, but we're going to work on setting up our default map, some names, changing out the project info, building everything so we can actually play it, and then playing it all as a standalone.